Okay, it's 7:01, so whenever you're ready to start, we're ready.
Sure. Do you want to take roll first?
Sure. Vice Mayor Du Bois.
Here.
Councilmember Niss. Liz, you there? Oh, let me unmute you here. Let's see.
I think we're remuting.
Okay. Councilmember Niss.
I'm here.
Chair Tanaka.
Here.
Okay, 3 present.
Okay, let's get this meeting started. So the first is a call the meeting to order, and we're going to do oral communications. Clerk, is there anyone from the public that wishes to speak?
If there are any members of the public that would like to speak during oral communications, could you please raise your hand in the Zoom applications, or if you're dialing in, press *9. We'll give you guys a couple seconds to do that. It looks like we currently have 2 public speakers.
Do you want to call them? And how much time do we typically give people?
Generally, we do 3 minutes, but it's up to you.
Okay, let's give them 3 minutes.
Okay. Okay, so Sarah Baltieres, we'll give you 3 minutes to speak. Go ahead.
Hi, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. I just wanted to introduce myself. My name is Sarah Baltieres. I am a project manager for Downtown Streets team in Palo Alto. I've met some of you before, but I just wanted to take this time to thank you all in the city of Palo Alto, specifically the Human Services Department, for allowing us to—
actually, hold on a second. If you're talking about the downtown streets, that's actually item 2. I should have been more clear. This is oral communications on items not currently on our agenda. So if you don't mind, if we could save you for like item 2.
Yeah,
which is
no problem.
Would that be okay?
Yes, thank
Okay.
you so much.
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
At this time, it looks like we have no other public speakers for oral communications.
Okay, so we're going to close oral communications, and let's start on the first action item, discussion of June 30th, 2019 actuarial valuation of Palo Alto's retiree healthcare plan and annual actuarially determined contributions ADC for fiscal years 2021 and 2022. The staff have a presentation.
Yes, thank you, Chair Tanaka. Good evening, I'm Kylie Nozay, the Administrative Services Director, and this next item is a biannual report that we do to study our OPEB, or other post-employment benefit liabilities, and the funding of that plan and the status of it. So we use a consultant, Bartal & Associates, to assist us in this analysis, and we have Mary Beth Redding here to walk us through the presentation.
Okay. Sorry guys, I'm just trying to get the presentation up. Go back to the beginning. Did it work? Can you see it?
Yep.
Okay.
Right.
So thank you all for having me here to talk with you this evening.
Also, I just want to let my colleagues know, same thing as last time. If you guys have questions, I think it's best. There's only really 4 of us here, so just feel free to jump in and ask questions as Mary goes through the presentation.
Please do, because I don't want people to get left behind, because then you'll be very bored by this. I should introduce myself. My name is Mary Beth Redding. I am an actuary at Bartal Associates. We're a firm of actuaries who do public sector work, and we're based in San Mateo, California. Not sure if Deanna is here. I don't see her on the my display, but Deanna Van Valer, my associate, may show up and be part of the presentation. We're here to talk about the OPEB valuation. OPEB is known as retiree healthcare benefits. So it's medical benefits that the city provides to its employees after they retire. The city has an obligation for these benefits. It's made promises to its employees to pay the benefits once they're retired. And so the city calculates its obligation for the benefits in these valuations every 2 years. The city has started to pre-fund the obligation. This is not common in particularly in California or across the country, but the city's been pre-funding since 2008. They've chosen a trust run by CalPERS. It's known as CBERT or CERBT, and the asset allocation of that trust is similar to what CalPERS uses for funding its pension benefits. The thing our valuation does is calculate the obligation for the benefits, how well funded it is, and we also recommend a contribution that the city should pay into the trust every year. And there's two parts to that contribution. One is called normal cost. It's the cost of benefits that employees earn every year. Now, even though they're going to get the benefits once they're retired, that benefit is deemed to accrue or be earned every year, kind of like deferred comp while they're still working. The second part of the contribution is to pay off the unfunded liability. And the reason there is a unfunded liability is primarily because these benefits existed long before the city started funding. So at the point they started setting money aside, there was already an obligation that became the unfunded liability. And right now there's 24 years remaining on its payment schedule. The city doesn't actually put the whole amount we calculate as a recommended contribution into the trust fund. The city pays certain benefits and premiums directly to the healthcare providers, and those are offsetting the contribution. We do evaluation every 2 years to do this calculation. So the one we're looking at now is going to calculate the recommended contribution for the 2021 year and 21-22. Accounting, these numbers go in your financial statements, in the city's financial statements. It's a separate calculation under very different rules, so we're not going to talk about that at all. I haven't really talked about the city's benefits in detail. They're very complicated. They've been changing over time, but the way I would characterize them is that in general, the city pays most of the healthcare premiums for its retirees and their dependents, most but not all, if they meet the eligibility requirements.
So
First
Mary,
chart, sorry.
before you go on, I just have a quick question on this one. So, with the COVID-19 situation and all the economic instability, there might be some cities who are going to have some. I mean, we're doing okay, I think, on this, but there might be some cities that might not be able to fully fund theirs, right? And so although we're trying to take care of the UAL, it's that money is still protected from other cities, or perhaps even the state getting it, right? Because of the way they're doing it.
Okay, that money is just yours. You're the only people that can access it. The only thing it can be used is for retiree health care, but funding is still totally optional. So it's been your choice and turned out to be a very wise choice to set aside money in the fund, but it's certainly not required.
It's something I was thinking about just because of the fact that I'm reading about all these other cities who are in a world of hurt right now, and I just want to make sure that they can't grab this pot of money, right?
No, they can't.
Okay, great,
absolutely.
Thank you.
Mary, this is Tom. I have a quick question. So all the data we're looking at tonight is from June of 2019, and that's the data you used?
We used the employee data as of June of 2019. We actually picked up asset values of December 31st.
Okay. And then you project that for the next 2-year cycle, and you don't go back?
We don't go back.
Okay.
Okay.
Speaking about that, so it doesn't really include the recent drop, right, in the market?
No, it doesn't.
Okay. You're giving a lot of good answers.
You're asking good questions. Okay, we'll start with the charts. Why does okay, sorry. This is a chart that shows the number of participants in the city's plan over time from 2007, which is the first data we have access to. The number of people covered has gone from 1,600 to 1,900. The way the columns are set up, the green bars represent the number of retirees and the blue bars represent the number of active employees who could have benefits in the future. And what you can kind of tell is that most of the growth in headcount has come from the growth in the retiree population. And we expect this to continue. There's still more people retiring than are leaving the retiree population. So that will continue over time.
How does this compare to other cities in terms of like, are we like more green than most? Or are we less green than most?
In terms of number of people, it's very typical. What might be a little bit atypical is that most of your retirees take city benefits. You know, you don't actually have to provide that benefit at all to retirees. So some have very modest benefits and fewer retirees.
Mm.
This next slide is a breakdown of what I just showed you, and only covers the last 4 evaluations. But I had mentioned that the city's been changing its benefits it provides over time. And we've kind of labeled those for convenience: Group 1, Group 2, Group 3, Group 4, with Group 4 being the newest. You get into a group typically based on when you were hired, but there's a lot of other things going on. So the newest hires are in Group 4. And the reason this is important is that over time, each of the benefits in each of the groups has been a little bit less generous, so a little bit cheaper for the city, a little bit more costly for the employee. So as we see people, you know, the population becoming more and more Group 4, that means the city's costs are reducing a little bit. Switch over and talk about liabilities. These are the present value of benefits that are owed to people, both the active employees and the retirees. So the present value of benefits for retirees is green again. And it's gone from $55 million about 12 years ago to $159 million today. A lot of that growth is coming from just the numbers of people. The active employee liability is growing too, but not quite as quickly. The red line represents the value of assets.
Wait, hold on. Liz has a question.
I'm seeing if I'm muted. I never can tell. Okay, you can hear me.
Yes, I can.
So you're looking at a couple of things, not only the growth and the number of retirees, but also the number of retirees are living longer.
Yes.
And so you're blending all this in together. Plus, in the background, we have also renegotiated some of this with our staff.
Yes.
So you have those 3 things that you're kind of mixing in to this report, right?
Right, as well as the increase in the cost of healthcare over this time.
Oh, good point.
Yeah.
Good point.
So it's all sort of captured in this one number that's the accrued liability.
So Mary, just to make sure I understand this chart. So that red line, so you said in 24 years you'll be caught up, right? So does that mean that red line will match top of the bars in 24 years? Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay. So right now we are kind of like, we're better than we were in 2007, but we're not at the top of the bars yet.
Right. You're about 49%, so just about halfway funded.
Okay. Okay.
Which I have to say is really great for only starting funding 11 years ago. You know, it's a lot of people would love to be 50% funded for their OPEB benefits.
And
Go ahead.
And for OPEB, is all of the funding in our trust, or we actually pay CalPERS some and put some in a trust?
It's all in your trust, which is run by CalPERS.
Okay.
But just in the same way you're paying pension benefits every month to your retirees, you're paying OPEB benefits every month to people.
We have a separate 115 trust, so we're paying twice for pension, but we're not paying twice here.
You're right. There's only one place.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. So, so even though CalPERS manages this, they still can't reach into the trust for.
No.
Okay. Even if they go bankrupt or the state goes bankrupt or other cities go bankrupt, we're okay.
Right. And that's actually one of the requirements of this kind of trust, is that it can only be used for benefits. It's not subject to bankruptcy.
So Mary Beth, you said something about comparison with other cities a few minutes ago.
Yes.
Could you make that statement again?
So
looking at this and thinking through does Menlo Park, does Mountain View look, who else?
I can't tell you about specific cities. What I can tell you is that last time we kind of added up among our clients, our average client was 24% funded. But those are California clients who've been listening to their Bartell Associates actuaries for 10 years, telling them they ought to fund this obligation. If you go out in the rest of the state and particularly the rest of the country, almost nobody is funding their OPEB liability.
Good, thank you. I appreciate that. It's helpful to know where we stand with others, partly just for the interest of it, but also to see where are we going and are we going in the right direction?
You're definitely going in the right direction. And I don't want to suggest that you might change what you're doing, but it's just nice to know that that money is set aside. And if you need it, it's there.
Yes, it
Gives
is.
you a little breathing room.
So Mary Beth, just back to that red line there.
Yes.
So, you know, we've had a pretty significant drop in the market, right? So, I know that we invest fairly conservatively, or I guess CalPERS invests fairly conservatively, but I would still imagine that's dropped. If you were to guess where it is right now, what do you think it would be?
What we saw, I'm trying to think. I know that from the beginning of the year, CalPERS is close to level, maybe down 1%, but we started kind of up in December. So it might be a 5 to 10% drop. But I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, and I can show you some different numbers. Okay, because we still don't know where it's going to be by the end of the year. Every day it's several percent different.
Sure.
Okay. I actually need to digress for a minute and talk about something that's probably difficult and very technical, but it's this issue of the implied subsidy. The way CalPERS charges healthcare premiums, because the city buys its healthcare coverage from CalPERS, is that they charge the same premium for all active employees and for all retirees who are not yet 65. So the monthly premium is the same for all those people. And what we know, sorry?
1 through 4, same, no matter what? Even if
yeah,
really?
the premium that CalPERS charges is the same, assuming you've elected the same plan. But what we know from studies is that active employees, you know, your 25-year-olds have very low healthcare costs, and older people, particularly once they retire, have higher healthcare costs. And that's not reflected in the premium. Everyone's charged the same premium, which is kind of, you know, the point of insurance, that we share that risk. But the actuarial and the accounting rules changed in about 2013 and said, when I do an actuarial valuation for retirees, I'm not allowed to look at only the premium that CalPERS charges. I have to look at the true cost of the benefits they're getting, so the true cost of their health care. And that increased the liabilities, and the amount of that increase is something we call implied subsidy. And so this picture, the top of the bar is the same as it was in the last bar, but we've broken out these light colored pieces, and that's the amount of extra value we had to add starting in 2013, called the implied subsidy. Okay, so if you didn't have the implied subsidy right now, instead of the total liability being about 241 million, it would be about 201 million. And instead of 49% funded, you'd be very close to 59% funded. So we just want to bring that up because, you know, the rules are the rules, but back in 2008, when the city started funding, there was no implied subsidy, and, you know, the track you were on would have been projected to be a little better.
But is that real money, or is that just money that we have to do in the future?
So it's the implied subsidy. We have a lot of arguments about whether or not it's real. And the easiest way to see it is that if CalPERS charged retirees what their benefits really cost, the premiums for active employees would be lower. So when you pay, the city pays its premiums for healthcare for active employees, it's actually overpaying. And there's some accounting rules that kind of even that out so you don't double count. Okay, so I said it was going to be technical, but now we've talked about it and we're done.
Okay.
Okay. Talk a little bit about return on assets. This chart shows the actual annual return on the city's OPEB trust fund every year since 2008. The red line represents the annual returns, and the orange line across the middle is what we assumed the rate of return was going to be. It's actually a pretty nice picture. The rate of return is always going to be variable, but it's sort of centered around our assumption. And what you can see is in our projection for 2020, we did have a good return projected that we're most likely not going to see. But we do expect that every year in the future, we're going to have the same up and down, up and down, up and down. So it all sort of evens out in the end, and what you choose for any particular year doesn't make that big of a difference.
So, but given today's world, this weird world that we're in, because this looks so good and it was a good projection, it's a good outcome, but I can't imagine we're looking at something like this over the next year or two.
We don't think so, certainly through June 30th. It's just hard to tell. The other thing I should tell you, and I kind of didn't want to talk about this because it's a little bit technical again, is that we do something called asset smoothing when we calculate the contribution, where we sort of average the returns for the past 5 years. So even though we did start at kind of a high point here, that's only a little bit reflected in the contribution.
And what kind of assets are these invested in?
They are, let me go down a few slides. They are, on this slide, you'll see them in option 1. There's just under 60% in global equities, 25% fixed income, and then they've got real estate, tips, a few other things.
Thanks.
Actually, just
A
for
good
curiosity,
return. I was thinking that looks very good.
what's the difference between the 3 options in terms of which one's chosen?
So the city, once it decides to give its money or invest its money with CERBT, it can choose option 1, 2, or 3. Option 1 is more aggressive. Option 3 is more conservative, meaning there's less equity and more fixed income.
Which one do we pick?
You're in option 1.
Okay.
And that's the option that most people choose when their fund is growing, because you have a very long-term horizon. You're going to be paying out benefits for 80 or 100 years. And so the city would have chosen that option thinking that over time it'll give a better return and we can live with the ups and downs. Most of the people in CERBT do take option 1. There's some in option 3 and 1 or 2 and option 2 in the middle. Okay. Where was I? We talked about return on assets.
Okay, on that other graph, one thing that's kind of interesting is that it looks like the volatility is shrinking over time. And is that just coincidence, or is there?
I think it's just coincidence. It's also because the very first year the city invested was 2008, and remember what an awful year that was. And it was a great year to have almost no money in the trust.
Yeah,
It's not like we're changing the investment portfolio. It's just that it's less volatile years.
I think that I can't say for sure, but my suspicion is also that CalPERS has felt some pressure to get rid of volatility. So it's hard to say if that's their great strategy working or if it's just the way things happened. Okay. So it changes. Let's see. I can't remember if I pointed out to you when we were back at slide 5 that these 2 columns, if you look at 2019, it's actually a little bit lower than 2017. So liabilities came down a little bit. And normally we expect them to go up every year. And so I did want to talk a little bit about why that happened. The liabilities we measured in the 2019 valuation were actually close to $30 million less than we would have expected. The biggest part of that was a $23 million gain due to premiums being lower than we had expected. So CalPERS charging lower premiums than we thought they would. And that mainly, that's not something you hear about. The reason you don't hear about it, it's mostly the premiums they charge to the Medicare eligible people were lower than expected. So that reduced the city's liability. There was some decreases from census data, some increases and decreases from other costs. But the good news was the liability was lower than expected. So when we put together the assets and liabilities, we have the unfunded liability and we calculate the recommended contribution for the city. This chart shows in the blue dots going back to 2010 and 11 what we had calculated as a recommended contribution. And you can see that in these years, for the next 2 years, the contribution is lower than it had been because we did have these actuarial gains. And then going forward, the green dots show where it's projected to go in the future. So the contribution in terms of dollars goes up and up and up until 2043, 44. And that's the point where the unfunded liability is paid off. Assuming, I should say, for sure, about the green dots, assuming everything goes exactly as expected. It won't. But if it did, the unfunded liability would be paid off at that point. The dollar amount of the contribution would drop significantly to where you're only paying for benefits employees are earning every year. Okay. Step back just for a moment and talk about assumptions, because you might be wondering how we do all these projections. We have an assumption called healthcare trend, which is what we assume premiums will increase at going forward. And those are based in a large part on Society of Actuary modeling. We use demographics, are things like when do we assume people will retire? How many people do we assume will stay with the city until they retire and not quit sooner? Those are all based on CalPERS's studies of public employees in California. So we feel like they represent our group. We look at actual city experience for how many employees, once they retire, do choose to enroll in the city's plans, because not everybody does. So that's very much based on the city itself. The one assumption I didn't talk about was the discount rate. So we're using 6.75% to discount the future liabilities and to calculate the present values. And as the rate of return, we assume the assets will earn. And so we do that based on the slide we looked at a moment ago. We use our capital market assumptions to model what we expect that asset mix will earn in the long-term future. So we think option 1 will average about 6.75%. That's our 50th percentile assumption. And all the accounting rules really indicate very strongly that that's how you should use your discount rate. You should select it as the most likely rate. Sorry?
Could you go back just one slide?
Yeah.
So on this slide here, sorry, my screen just finally updated. On this slide here, what is the life expectancy age you guys are using right now?
It's hard to answer because actuaries don't actually use a life expectancy. We calculate a percentage that what percentage of people will die each year. But Deanna, I don't know if you're able to talk. I want to say it's in the 80s, and it's increased several years over the past decade or so.
The reason I ask is because I mean, back to what Councilmember Niss was kind of talking about, people are living a lot longer now.
They
right?
are.
And so you know, some of those actuaries are a little bit backward looking, right? Compared to what people look. It's not unusual now for people to live till like 90s or 100 even.
Yes.
And so, and then the other thing that happens is the cost as they get older, it gets a lot more expensive too. So it's kind of like a double whammy. So I'm just trying to think of how much is that factored in here already.
Okay. So if you look in the demo, I'm not sure you guys can see my mouse. Probably you can.
Yeah.
Okay. See this one that says mortality improvement? It's exactly what you were talking about. Actuaries were always looking backwards and saying, based on the data, how long did people live in the past? And finally, took a while, but we realized that people were living longer and longer, and we really should be building that in ahead of time. So now the Society of Actuaries puts out these scales for how much we expect younger people to live longer than we do. And it's not a ton. It's like a year or so, like your kids might live on average a year longer than you and their kids a year longer than them, but it's enough to add quite a bit to the liabilities.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. So it sounds like you already factored that in.
Yeah. And we also do factor in that costs go up as you age. Even though Medicare picks up a lot of that, there still is net increase of cost to the city. Okay. Where was it? Okay, so we talked about discount rate. We think 6.75% for the option one that the city's in. Based on that, it's kind of the point of why I was talking about discount rates. I wanted to show you a chart. The left-hand column of numbers is last year's results just for comparison. And the middle column is what our actual valuation calculated. An unfunded liability of $123 million, 49% funded, and a recommended contribution of $14.5 million. City staff would like to be a little more conservative than that. And they asked us, what would these numbers have come out as if you had used 6.25% as the expected future return on assets instead of 6.75? So if we were a little more conservative, we would have calculated an unfunded liability of 138 million. It would have been a little less funded, and the recommended contribution would have been 15.9. So city staff is recommending just to have a little bit of leeway, a little bit of conservatism, that a larger contribution be made to the trust for next year.
Mary Beth, just to elaborate on that and to the committee, this is in alignment really with the actions that the council has taken on the pension side, where we've moved to a normal cost of with a 6.2 discount rate and providing contributions to our 115 trust at that level. And so this would be taking similar actions on the OPEB side to try and keep our proactive funding in line between the two ongoing liabilities. But ultimately, as Mary Beth mentioned, if we want to, it is a policy call to move that discount rate more in line with our pension side.
Well, I think, sorry.
Why the 6.25 versus 6.2? Why not make them exactly the same?
Mary Beth was running the scenarios for us, and the different option 2 plan is what we were looking at, is if we were in a more conservative plan.
Yeah, we just picked the rates that we had projected for those two funds.
If you're able to enable your video, that'd be great, just so we know who's talking when. But back to the 6.25. I mean, we've been on a 10-year bull run, right? Like we've had the best economy in the history of the country for the past 10 years until COVID-19, essentially. I mean, I know it's hard to conjure up what is the, what's it really going to be now, but it looks like we're in for some kind of hard times, at least for the next few years. I mean, should it be 6.25 or should it be something else?
So let me take a stab at this, and Mary Beth can help reiterate it. Really what we need to remember is we're not investing short-term here. We're looking at a significantly long-term investment and the strategy associated with that. So I completely understand and agree, if we were going to try and cash out this trust fund tomorrow, we should really be looking at a more conservative rate. And looking at ratcheting down, frankly, the tier that our trust is invested in from option 1 to probably something more like option 3. But we're really not in a state where we are doing short-term investing here. We're looking at over, to what was it, 2044 or something like that. We're looking at multiple decades from an investment perspective and averaging out the returns over that period of time. So Mary Beth, I don't know if I missed anything.
No, I think that really covers it, Kylie. You have so much time to make up any losses. And we do these valuations every 2 years. We're constantly truing things up to actual.
So I just want to quickly clarify. So the option proposed, we would stay in the fund 1, but we would use the 6.25 discount rate for normal costs. Yeah. Okay.
Well, for our funding, it wouldn't just be normal cost. It would be for the full funding of our OPEB liabilities.
Okay.
So we would leave the assets, like you said, in option 1, which is that more aggressive. But if you look at Mary Beth's chart on this table or slide 12, the bottom right corner, we would be looking at funding citywide 15.9 million to OPEB liabilities as opposed to the 14.6 million.
Yep. Okay.
So Mary Beth, what has been the long-term rate of return for Fund 1?
Deanna, do you know offhand?
I do. I do not, but while you're talking, I could see if I can quickly find a CalPERS publication with that answer.
Yeah, the problem when you compare the long-term rate of return on those three CalPERS funds is that Fund 1 starts fairly early and before 2008, and Fund 2 and Fund 3 are newer, and so they don't have the bad years. And so if you look at each of their return to date, it's really not very comparable.
Oh no, I just want to make sure that it's higher than 6.25. That's what I'm.
Yeah, it should be higher than 6.25 because it's very similar to CalPERS's big pension fund, and that is, I want to say it's over 7% for the past 15 years.
Okay, so can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm looking at a publication from CalPERS, and their average over the last 10 years, gross return for CERBT1 was 5.91%.
Okay, actually, the past 10 years has been the best years of the history of the country. So, or I mean, it's in general, the economy of the world has actually we've been on a big boom cycle. But how about the 10 years before that, or the 5 years before that? How's it been?
I don't think they were there.
They weren't there. It's too new. The fund was started in 2007.
Okay.
And it didn't, and the way, I'm not sure how they dollar average it. You know, it grew very small and it's been growing and growing. So I just don't have a lot of faith in any of their reported numbers.
But I mean, it does give you pause to think that the past 10 years, which has been, some of the best years economically, globally, it's only been 5.9%, which is actually below 6.25, right? So, and given that we just have this COVID-19, which is going to be like a major reset on the economy of around the world, I mean, you got to think about are we going to be able to do 6.25 over the next 10 years? I don't know, right?
Yeah, I want to go back and get you better information on exactly how that return was calculated. Because I do think it depends a lot on the timing and the way the fund grew from almost nothing at the beginning to much bigger now.
For the past 10 years, that should be an awesome number because it's starting from a recession, the Great Recession, to top of the market. So it should have been 5.9 should have been pretty good numbers, right? I mean, that should.
But if you also missed 10 and 11 by not having much money in your fund, you also missed the really best years.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay.
The other thing that's going on is this is a March 31, 2020. So it's including the market drop over the most recent completed quarter, which was tremendous.
Oh, I see. Okay.
The 3-month loss was about a -15.
Okay.
Cool. So I have one more slide I wanted to show you. And this is going to look kind of obvious probably to you, but this is a projection of the unfunded liability if everything goes according to schedule or according to our assumptions. The gray bars are the dollar amount of the unfunded liability every year. And so what you can see is it kind of holds steady right now. We're paying it down very, very slowly, but as it starts to decrease, each contribution pays off more of the principal and the unfunded liability drops. And the red line marks the funded status, which increases to 100% funded in 2044. And again, it may seem like, of course, it would do that. That's why we're making payments on the unfunded. But a lot of times cities have funded strategies that don't actually accomplish paying off the unfunded liability. So we do like to check and make sure that goal should be met in the future. And I'm very happy to say that it works here.
So just out of curiosity, were you here last year? Did you do this report last year?
I did it 2 years ago.
Okay.
I don't think we came last year.
Okay, so 2 years ago, was the date still 2044 or was it a different? It's
still 2044 because the way the unfunded amortization works is that we say, 2 years ago, we said whatever the unfunded is, we're going to pay it off over 26 years. And this year we say whatever the unfunded is, we're going to pay it off over 24 years.
I'm just wondering. I was wondering whether there's rolling 26 years or whether the date.
It's
stops.
closed.
Okay. Okay.
It's closed.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's why it actually does get paid off, because it's not
Sure.
rolling and we haven't restarted it.
So Greg, are we due to do anything with this tonight?
Yeah.
I don't.
Yeah, we are.
Are we-
So I think it's the staff recommendation is that we recommend the city council to review and accept. So we are reviewing, and we'll see if we accept it or not.
Well, I'd be glad to make the motion when you're ready.
Well, maybe let's let Mary Beth finish the presentation.
That was the last slide of my presentation, and I think we
There you go.
covered questions already.
I have a handful of quick questions.
Sure.
So our total unfunded liability, is that the 116.5 million? Is that right?
It's
Projected as of June 30th.
projected as of June 30th. Yes.
And then are we saying that our fund has 118 million in it?
Yes.
So we have more in our fund than we have
No.
liability.
Okay, so let's go back to this slide. The total liability is 241 million. There's 118 in the fund. So the difference between those numbers, and I'm giving you June 30th, 19 and not June 30th, 20. So the unfunded liability is about I can't do them in my head, $120 million.
Okay,
It's a difference between those.
got it. So the number in the report I was looking at already subtracted out the amount of the fund.
Yes.
And then maybe this is more of a question for Kylie. I think we license some software that would let us do some of these analyses ourselves. Was that only for pension?
I believe so. I'm actually going to have to ask Steve. Steve, do you know if we can? I don't think we can do OPEB on the other one.
Good evening, council members, Finance Committee. Steve Guagliardo with the Administrative Services Department. Kylie, you are correct. The software we have is used for modeling pension costs. It is not yet set up to do OPEB costs, and I do not believe it has that functionality as of yet.
Okay, cool. And then my last question is it worth looking at the difference between general fund and the safety plans for this, or is it all kind of average out?
Do you want me to speak to that?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. One of the breakdowns we do in our valuation report is to show you costs separately by general fund, safety, and other I'm blanking, other entities, other subdivisions, and we break out the costs by all those subdivisions. Even though pretty much everybody has the same benefits, they are much more costly in general for safety people. So the city does allocate those costs among all the groups.
Okay, good. Yeah, I'm also ready to make a motion. So
Okay, but before we do that, actually, I need to give members of the public a chance to speak on this item. Clerk, do you want to check to see if there's anyone who wishes to speak on it?
If there are any members of the public that would like to speak on this item, please raise your hand in the Zoom feature or press *9. Chair Tanaka, it does not look like we have any public speakers.
Okay, so I'm going to entertain a motion in just a second, but wanted to ask one other question, which is, you probably know that we're looking at a pretty big budget shortfall, and I think the average person would ask, well, what happens if we were to some of the stuff you have to pay into the future? What happens if, let's say, we skip this year? What happens? What does that do to our plan?
Let's go and look at this projection here. So what would happen if you didn't make a payment this year is one of two things could happen. You could say, instead of paying the unfunded liability off by 2044, let's pay it off by 2045 and sort of shift it ahead into the future. You could also say, we want to stay on the same time schedule, but since we didn't make a payment, it's kind of like if you don't pay a mortgage payment, right? They increase all the rest of your payments.
Yeah.
But it is certainly the city's option.
Yeah, I personally don't like the idea, but I just want to bring it up because I think that's something people might be thinking.
I'm not going to support that idea, Greg.
Yeah. So yeah. Okay. Anyways, do either of you guys have motions on this?
Either of us. I'm glad to move that we accept the report. And
So the full recommendation was to accept the report and then approve the funding, or recommend approval of the funding of the EDC for fiscal year 2021 and 2022.
Right, and just to
Good.
clarify for the committee, it would be recommending it at the 6.25 discount rate for both fiscal year 2021 and 2022.
so let's see if Kim is doing the motions tonight. So Kim, are you there somewhere?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, do you want more clarification on the motion, or are you looking at the item and you've caught that?
I was looking at the staff recommendation and I think I caught that.
Okay, great. I don't see it in writing, but I know what it is. So I would move that forward. I would certainly suggest that we pay our bill this year. I don't like to think of going forward with that not being up to date. And lastly, I really appreciate the good presentation tonight, and thanks, Kylie, for being here.
I'll second it. And I also appreciate the drop to the 6.25. So thanks for that.
Okay. Do either one of you guys speak to your motion?
I did.
Okay. Seconder?
I'm good.
Okay. So I think we should take a vote then. So we'll just do I guess we can't visually do it. So
You have to count us. You have to call on us, I'm afraid.
exactly. Okay. Vice Mayor.
Yes.
Okay. Councilmember Niss.
Yes.
Okay. I also vote yes. And thank you both for your work on this presentation.
Thank you to Mary Beth and her team, and Deanna and Steve and Maria and Jesse, who have all been working on these. And just so the committee knows, what you'll see is the result of this transaction materialize in the recommendations next week as part of the 2021 budget balancing.
Great. So let's move to action item number 2, the staff representation.
Good evening, Chair Tanaka and Finance Committee members. I will share my screen here with you. Okay. Okay. So I am Jonathan Late. I'm the Planning and Development Services Director. And I think the Finance Committee members are generally familiar with the fact that the City of Palo Alto receives annual funds from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development through its CDBG program. This is to support local governments with grants to improve the physical and economic and social conditions in their communities. All of the recommendations included in this report would go to support the very low income individuals in Palo Alto. To be eligible to receive funding through HUD, there are 2 items that we need to have. One is a consolidated plan. This is a 5-year plan. And the second is an annual action plan. The recommendation is that the Finance Committee supports the staff-prepared consolidated 5-year plan, the annual action plan for fiscal year 2021, and that the Finance Committee support the funding allocations, or as modified by this committee, to the City Council for the different agencies that would receive funding, and authorize the City Manager to advance any of its to execute the documents needed to move forward. The consolidated plan process is an iterative one that consists of the steps that are before you on the screen. I'll note that in May 2019, the consortium of Santa Clara County and cities launched an in-depth collaborative regional effort to consult with community stakeholders to identify housing and community development needs. There were community surveys that were published in 4 different languages. Regional public forum was hosted in Palo Alto in November, and pop-up events, or at least one pop-up event that was held at the Palo Alto Farmers Market, where we distributed flyers and reached about 100 individuals. The consultant for the project also conducted stakeholder meetings, 25 to 30 stakeholder meetings. The
I just want to remind colleagues, if you guys have any questions here, just feel free to ask them as we go through. That way we have better context. Sorry, why don't you go ahead, John?
Thank you, Chair. The consolidated plan has these goals that the funding allocation must be directed toward each of these goals. That's one of the plan requirements. And for this current fiscal year coming up, the action plan, I'm going to shift now from the consolidated plan to the annual action plan. The city has approximately $850,000 of entitlement money to pass along, and that does not include roughly $295,000 from the CARES Act, which I'll talk about in a moment. The funding categories for where the money may be used are in the areas of public services, planning and administration, economic development, housing rehabilitation, and public facilities.
So Jonathan, can you stop for a minute?
Yep.
I don't recall why there is that amount from previous years, the 213.
Yes, some of the funding was not allocated, was not spent in the previous cycle, and
we usually are trying to get rid of our money and do good deeds with it. Was there something unusual that happened?
One of our agencies did have a challenge fulfilling their requirements, and we did work with HUD and to address that issue. You're absolutely right. We try to spend every dollar that we get for these important services, and we're hoping to do that again this year. You'll see actually in a slide or two how we're addressing one of those issues in this upcoming cycle.
Thanks.
One other question here on this slide, while you're on it, is so all this is federal money, or does any of it come from the city?
No.
Okay, and what are the restrictions on this in terms of, we have this big gaping hole in our revenue, right? So it sounds like there's a lot of restrictions, but I don't know if you could speak a little bit about that.
Yeah, there are, it can only be used, there's basically 3 categories where the money can be used. And one is for low income persons, another is to prevent or eliminate slums or, those types of conditions in the community. And the other is to address urgent needs that may be prevalent in the community. So it's really restricted to supporting low-income households. And you'll see part of our recommendation here this evening, we're allocating $500,000, a little bit more than that, for rental assistance and some other issues related to the COVID-19 situation that we're in. Okay. Let's see. So we're on the funding allocation for the current or the upcoming fiscal year. There's 850,000 to distribute. In addition, another 295,000, which I'll talk about in a moment, in these different categories. So one of the categories I mentioned was public services, and there's a cap of how much we can spend in this category. What you'll see on this slide and the subsequent slides are the agencies, the program name, what they were provided last year in terms of an allocation amount, if they did receive an allocation. And then these last two columns address sort of a period in time where the far right column is the selection committee. This is a subset of the HRC that reviewed the plan before and made their recommendations. And then once we received, once we entered the shelter in place order, we reached out to each one of the agencies to verify their continued commitment to these programs, whether or not their request had been modified or changed. And in a couple of instances that you'll see below, it has changed in response to COVID-19. And so that's addressed below. And so the staff recommendation reflects those ongoing conversations that we've had. On this particular slide, you can see it's relatively a wash between the staff recommendation and the selection committee. If the finance committee feels either way on that, we're happy to, make those adjustments.
Jonathan, can you just speak like, why it looks like money was taken from Catholic Charities and went to Palo Alto Housing? Was that just a discussion you had, or?
Yeah, so this, I think the selection committee had a more sort of, was just they're just two different ways of responding to it. We took a percentage of the total money that was available and how much money they received, and we did a comparable reduction base because you could see that we had about 5,000 less this year from last year. And I think the selection committee was just going for more rounded numbers.
Got it. Okay.
So either way is perfectly fine.
And is the staff number, is that a group of staff making that decision?
Oh, no, yeah, we do have a staff member that works collaboratively with managers and a consultant to come up with these numbers. Yes, it's a collaborative process. City staff and one consultant.
So you said this is a subset of the HRC?
Oh, I'm sorry, the selection committee?
Yeah.
Yes, I'm sorry, Councilman or Vice Mayor Du Bois, if you were referring to.
Yeah, I was just referring to the staff committee. It wasn't just one staff person, it was
yes,
a group.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so my answer holds for your question. And then to Chair Tanaka, I'm blanking on the individual names, but yes, it's a subcommittee of the HRC.
And why not the full HRC?
Oh, they were going to see this actually, but it happened right at the time where we had to shelter in place. Ordinarily, we would have gone back to the HRC and they would have had their meeting, and then their recommendation would have moved on to the Finance Committee and then on to City Council. So we're really just kind of responding to the circumstances that we find ourselves in and the need to meet some requirements to get this submitted before the deadline.
And how many of these got funding before? Is it all these the same groups, or has it changed at all?
No, there's each of the agencies that are on this slide and the subsequent slide had received funding before, or at least were eligible for funding before. There's one new agency that you'll see toward the end here that had applied and is now, we're now in a position to provide funding for because of the additional 295,000 that we've received from the federal government. But you can see in the middle, I'm sorry.
There's pretty big ones coming later on too.
Yeah. Okay, so I'll move on to the next slide, which is planning and administration. This is also capped. This is the administrative support from the city side of this, and Project Sentinel, which provides dispute resolution or helps individuals who may have a dispute with a landlord. The allocations are relatively consistent between, or they are consistent between the selection committee and staff.
Was there a discussion on how, like, Because I think Councilmember Nist remarked yesterday about how it's difficult to give these grants to nonprofits. It's actually, and I understand why, because there has to be, what is the objective criteria in terms of measuring was there a good return on investment from, I mean, not necessarily in monetary terms, but in terms of social good. How do you guys, how does the HRC staff determine that we're maximizing the social good out of these dollars that we're investing?
Right. So every year we have to do an analysis and review of the program. And that's part of the annual report that we prepare to see how many underserved or low-income families or individuals have been helped. And so we're looking for trend lines and seeing how folks have been aided by this program. If we don't see measurable success or not achieving the program goals, then we wouldn't continue or recommend continuing funding those programs. But in each of these instances, the agencies have met their the goals of the consolidated plan, and then also more specifically the annual action plans.
So, but Jonathan, this has a long history with it. And there are years when we've argued about who got what, and sometimes we've argued over $2,000 or $3,000 as we want to do. So I think many of these are already known to us, and there is a history with them and a predictability, don't you think?
Absolutely, yeah. Every one of the agencies that we have here are ones that we've worked with before. We always try to expand the program. You may recall a couple of years ago, we had this incubator small business program that we tried to support. It wasn't successful,
Right. Yes.
but that's the kind of thing that we try to do. You'll see that we're looking to support the Mayview Clinic this time around too, which I think the community knows quite well, and we're able to support this time around.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Okay, so the Downtown Streets team is another one of the programs that we've funded in the past for quite some time. This is one where, in consultation with this agency, in response to shelter in place, they have asked that the original request that they had interest in was the $336,000, that $100,000 of that be reserved for their food closet. And so since the selection committee meeting in this post-COVID conversation that we had with them, we're suggesting or recommending that $100,000 of the money that was going to be allocated to the Downtown Streets team be addressed in another category, which will come up in a moment.
So I had quite a few officers on this topic on Downtown Streets, in terms of some people talk about accountability and things like that. Can you speak a little bit about some of that? I think even some HRC members talked to me about this, so I'll be curious to know staff's take on it.
Well, right. So there was a fairly lengthy conversation at the selection committee meeting, and you can see the footnote on the slide here. There was an interest in receiving some reports, and there was the two reports, the Oppenheimer report, pay equity report, and a survey of the current climate. I think the selection committee was trying to get at that issue. And to the extent that that there, there's an interest in, we want these programs to support the low-income households, or provide the training to help homelessness in this particular instance. This committee can have a conversation about those programs as well as the selection committee did. I don't have any more detail. None of these reports were provided to staff.
Let me jump in, if you don't mind, John. This is Ed
Sure.
Shikata. Just to, as the council knows, as we've communicated in follow-up to the issues raised in response to some media articles regarding Downtown Streets, that we had, and in fact the mayor had communication with the Downtown Streets board on those allegations. And based upon the discussions we've had and follow-up information we received from both the board and the management of Downtown Streets, staff is recommending proceeding with the funding as you see on this table. That's certainly fair game for the council and committee to discuss further to your comfort level. But would note that some of the information that was requested by the selection committee is quite frankly out of proportion to the kind of information we request from other organizations. And so on the basis of consistency in terms of how we treat our nonprofit partners, staff is recommending proceeding.
Jonathan, though, I heard something about 100,000 for food. Did I hear you correctly?
Yes, $100,000 would be reserved for the food closet. And
out of the downtown streets or from another fund?
Out of downtown streets.
Okay. I think that's really appropriate given what's been going on and the fact that the Community Foundation has contributed now, you know, many thousands of dollars. So I'm pleased to see there's another 100 that's going for food.
That's a downtown streets request, right?
Yeah, that was in consultation with Downtown Streets. Okay. Thank you. I'll move on to the next slide. Again, on the annual action plan. This is for housing rehabilitation. Here's another agency where we reached out to Habitat for Humanity. We had some challenges last year in achieving some of our funding objectives. And in consultation with them in the shelter in place, after the shelter in place order, we sort of came to this shared understanding that the money should be reallocated to other agencies. We fully expect Habitat for Humanity to reapply in the next cycle, and we would certainly support their efforts in doing so. So here's another 150,000 roughly that we're going to talk about in a few moments when I get to the next slides. We have the 100,000 from Downtown Streets, and we have now 150,000 from this agency that's going to be deferred to another program. Okay, so you can see those numbers. The roughly 295,000 from the federal government as part of the CARES Act, and the money that was unspent in the previous slides, the 100,000 plus the 150. Enables us to consider spending of about 550,000 for other agencies or other support operations. And so one that clearly is in need right now relates to rental relief. The City Council even gave staff direction to study further on this. And here's a way where we can relatively quickly, once we get through the paperwork process of filing the applications and so forth, get money to these agencies who are helping individuals who are having some challenges meeting rent payments. The rent amounts would range roughly between 1,500 and 2,000. Recipients would be able to receive help for up to 3 months with these different agencies.
So with Life Moves, is that the portion that moves with the Opportunity Center or with the housing? Which one?
Housing.
So with the housing, so actually that's going to the Housing Authority, right?
Well, I'm not exactly sure of the details of there, but Life Moves was in a previous slide, and that did have to do with the Opportunity Center. This is to help individuals who are having challenges making rent payments.
Right. Okay. I think they're different, but that's fine. I'm glad to see it.
This was Palo Alto Housing, I think, was asking for help with Life Moves for affordable housing payments. This is that. Right?
That's correct. I actually reached out to Randy Suda, and that was their interest, is that there be support for this agency and others like it. Okay. So that would amount for 379,000, and then here's the food closet, 100,000 for Downtown Streets, and Mayview Community Health is looking to continue with its COVID testing, and here's an opportunity for us to be able to support them with nearly $70,000 CDBG funds. Okay, so just to reiterate, the staff recommendation is that the Finance Committee recommend to the City Council allocation of the CDBG funding as outlined in your packet, that you authorize the city manager to execute the requisite applications and documents, that the City Council adopt the action plan and the consolidated plan that will be a 5-year document that will guide future action plans through 2025. With that, I'm happy to answer any other questions that you may have. I want to acknowledge the great work of Aaron Makbul and Marilyn Roth, our consultant. They're the ones who have really spent a tremendous amount of time in outreach and making this program come together. So we're all here to answer any questions that you may have.
Okay, maybe since we finished the presentation, I know there's probably more questions that we have, but I just want to give members of the public a chance to ask questions on item 2, which is the CDBG grants. Does the clerk want to call the people who want to speak on this item?
Yes, thank you, Chair Tanaka. This is Kim in the clerk's office. There are 2 public speakers that have their hands raised, but if anyone else wishes to speak, please raise your hand in the Zoom feature or press *9 if you're participating by phone. So the first speaker is Owen Bird. So I'm going to allow him to talk, and you have 3 minutes, Mr. Bird.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Owen Bird here tonight in my capacity as board chair of the Downtown Streets team. I want to thank the city and city staff for its recommendation. Our staff is available, including tonight, if you need them, to answer any questions about our program. You know, we serve the most vulnerable people in Palo Alto, and they are greatly impacted by this crisis. I'm also very concerned about our former team members who we've moved into jobs and housing and remain vulnerable to falling back into homelessness, and we're working on that too. I want to address directly, I'll leave for staff any program questions. I want to address directly the kerfuffle that emerged in the press and that the subcommittee and the HRC addressed. When these complaints that I'm sure you all saw in the press came to the board, this is the most earnest board I've ever served on in my life. Michael Bolton, our treasurer, is a partner at Amiano. You know Carol Hubenthal, who used to work for the Weekly and is a leader in her church. Matthew Balls at Stanford, Brady Mickelson, chief legal officer of AI firm, Norm Robinson, the former dean of students affairs at Stanford, and others. We took this so seriously, and we immediately commissioned a report, and we did a full investigation. We spent a lot of money and a lot of time, and we did it by the book with no assumptions about the outcomes. And the good news is that our investigation revealed that there were no pay disparities and many of the other concerns that were raised. We just got the award again for one of the best places to work in the region among nonprofits. And in order to complete its work, the board adopted a number of procedural and governance improvements to make sure that if concerns were ever raised in the future, that we would address them. And so the report obviously deals with personnel issues that can't be made public. And so really it's the credibility of those of us on the board that are at stake here. And the way California nonprofit law works is we are the fiduciary agents responsible for the organization. We bear liability and we take that on willingly in order to serve. So I was a little concerned that the subcommittee there was one member of the committee that sort of went on a fishing expedition. I think if the full committee had reviewed it, that these recommendations would not have been forwarded, but that's what happened because of COVID. And I'm grateful for the city manager's comments. I have talked to him about it, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. Thanks.
Okay, the next speaker is Sarah Baltieres. You'll have 3 minutes.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sarah Balteras, and I am the current project manager for Downtown Streets team in Palo Alto. I just wanted to thank you all for your time. Thank you to the city. We honestly couldn't do the work that we do without you guys. I wanted to give a quick update on what we've been doing since the beginning of COVID. Staff is working from home. We are attending a Zoom weekly meeting with the city. A huge thank you to Minka and Mary from the city of Palo Alto. We are constantly working together to make sure that we're keeping our resources alive and well for those who need them the most. We have suspended all of our street shifts, but we continue to meet once a week to provide a basic needs stipend, updates, and resources for our team members. Our food closet is actually busier than ever. We have team members who have stepped up during this crisis to help us staff that food closet. We have started a food delivery service for those who are most vulnerable, whether it's because they're in a vulnerable age category or they have an underlying health condition. We're now working with Palo Alto Housing Corporation to deliver meals to residents who are also in need. We're just beyond grateful for the city of Palo Alto, to the HRC for recommending us for our emerging needs grant. We are just beyond excited, and we're going to continue to work and help those who are most vulnerable in our community, as we have for the past 15 years. We couldn't do this work without the city, who helps us bridge the gap every day, especially during this time that is so crucial in our community. I'm here to answer any questions that anyone may have regarding our program. Thank you for your time. Thank you for the recommendation. It is only because of this that we can continue to move forward with the work that we do.
Thank you. So the next speaker is Philip D. You have 3 minutes.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so my name is Philip Da, and I am the director at the Opportunity Center for Life Moves, who provide homeless services in Palo Alto. And I want to thank you very much for the recommendation by staff. We have had this emergency rental and utility assistance program for about 20 years. And we did get some money from the city of Palo Alto back in the day until the recession hit about 10 years ago, and that funding stopped. But we knew how important that work was by plugging the hole from people becoming homeless and being the safety net for the community. So we worked with the county and United Way and other private funding to make sure that we kept that program going. So $30,000 through this grant to be able to help Palo Alto citizens who may lose their house, who lose their jobs, or are not able to pay for rent because they don't have the health, they don't have sick time or whatever it is that they need to stay home, and we were able to keep them in their homes. But unfortunately, because of COVID-19, we are seeing a tremendous amount of people who are coming to us for rental assistance. Only yesterday, we processed about 15 applications, and beginning since the middle of March, we have processed over 50 applications and counting. And we know that this is just the beginning, because we don't know when this pandemic is going to end, and we don't know when people are going to go to jobs, or even when they go to work. They're still going to be furloughed. They may not even have the hours that they used to have to be able to pay the rent and also put food on the table for their families. And so currently we have spent $32,000 of the current funding we have through United Way and the county to help people pay their rent and not become homeless. And so we believe that this funding, if approved, will go a long way to help Palo Alto citizens maintain their homes, feed their families, put food on the table, and hopefully when it ends, we should still have some money to help other folks who might need some funding. So I just wanted to bring this to your attention that this is not just going to be a one-time emergency, but we hope that it will be an ongoing service that we can provide to the citizens of Palo Alto, because it's a need that's not been addressed for a long time. And we hope that we'll be able to take this advantage of this opportunity to serve the community. Thank you very much.
Chair, could I ask a quick question for the last speaker?
Yeah, go for it.
Was that Philip?
I think I enabled his speaker.
Can you re-enable Philip, please?
Yes, 1 second.
I'm enabled now.
Okay.
Yes, hi, thank you for speaking tonight.
Hi,
so, yeah, I guess we heard a request from Palo Alto Housing, and I was just curious, are your kind of rental funds currently depleted at this point? Are you kind of spending it as fast as it comes in?
Yes, sir. We have spent almost all the funding that we have. As soon as they come in, they go out the door. And most of the folks that we are helping are residents of the Palo Alto Housing Corporation. So we are working with Kate Young, who is the social service manager at Palo Alto Housing, to service all the tenants who have lost their jobs. And so, yes, most of the tenants that we are helping are from this Palo Alto Housing Corporation. And we haven't even done much with other folks who don't live in the housing corporation. So we've done I've emailed the school district and the congregations in Palo Alto, some of the pastors and stuff, to be able to get information out to the public that we have this funding coming in, or we have some funding available now that we can use to help them keep their homes.
Great. Thank you very much. Thanks again for talking tonight.
And Greg, could I ask Philip a question as well?
Absolutely, please. Actually, I don't know, Councilmember, if you can enable your video, that'd be awesome. If you could.
Hi, Philip. It's Liz Nis.
Hi, Liz.
How are you?
I'm well, thank you.
Good. I just want to make sure, Philip, the money that you're talking about is going to the Palo Alto Housing Corp, not to the housing authority next door to you, right?
Absolutely not. It's just going to pay rent at the Palo Alto Housing Corporation's properties. So it's not just going directly even to the Palo Alto Housing Corporation, it's going to their properties, all the properties they have in Palo Alto.
Okay. It's a tough time for everyone, isn't it?
Absolutely. We're seeing a lot of people who are coming to us for rent. And these are folks who, under normal circumstances, we've never seen before. In fact, under normal circumstances, we probably see about 3 or 4 applications a month. Now we're seeing about 15 a day. So it is really unprecedented.
Yeah, no, it's pretty awful, to be honest. It's hard to hear about it, but thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you very much.
So Phil, before you go, I'd like to say a few comments. So first of all, thank you so much for your work, and it's really hard times out there for a lot of people. So I think you're helping to provide that safety net. One thing I was just curious is I've been hearing about some of the other tenants where the Opportunity Center is, and some of them have talked about sometimes there's a lot of there's people who are thrown out of the Opportunity Center, but they still linger around near the Opportunity Center, and there's hypodermic needles on the ground, and burglaries and other kind of issues that come about. I guess, I mean, it's right in front of, right where the Opportunity Center is. How, I guess, what's your thoughts about that situation right now?
So it's a really big issue. I mean, in fact, even today I was talking to Dan Garber, who is an architect across the street from us, and somebody from the Palo Alto Medical Foundation, PAMF. It's been a struggle because our mission at the Opportunity, the drop-in center, is to provide services to homeless people, ultimately to get them housed and provide mental health care and basic needs for people. We have showers, we have laundry, we have computer lab, people can see a case manager, you name it, we have it. Unfortunately, there are a group of folks who are really not interested in any of these services that we provide, but rather they would come in and create a lot of problems. And so, because we think it's just very detrimental to the program that we're trying to run, we ask them not to come back. And unfortunately, they have decided that they're going to hang out across the street from us which is the car washing station right across the street. And so they've created their own shadow drop-ins, and this is maybe 4 or 5 different guys. And it's becoming an encampment, and it's creating problems in the neighborhood because they're catcalling shoppers to town and country, creating all kinds of problems. And we've worked with the police. And so in November, I called a meeting of all the communities involved, the architect, town and country, all the property managers around, including Pam. And then we brought in Andrew Bender, who is the police captain in Palo Alto, and a couple of police officers to be in the meeting, and we expressed our grievance to them. But unfortunately, I mean, there's so much the police department can do. These guys are still hanging out and creating a lot of problems for us. And so we are hoping that the city will help us, including the police department, to sweep that whole area and make it, and because their argument is that they're on public property. And so I do not have any authority to tell them to move. And when the police come, granted, yes, the police can do anything about that. And so it's been a big issue for us, and it really is creating problems for the program that we are trying to provide to the guys who are actually interested in bettering their lives. So any help we can get from the city will be great.
What would you like to see from us?
We would like to see the encampment disappear and people not hang out on Encina.
Okay. I don't know if the city manager is still online, but I'd love to get your thoughts on this.
Certainly, council member, as we've talked about, this is an example of an issue that is really, I'd say, somewhat endemic throughout metropolitan areas, and ours is no different from any other. You know, as we've talked about, really the issue of housing is an appropriate supportive housing for individuals who can find no other location is a part of the solution. And so certainly that's a topic that the council could take up if you'd like.
I think we probably should. I mean, I've heard it not just from the Opportunity Center, but from a lot of people in that area, and there's like a safety concern as well. So this is not necessarily a topic, not a time to talk about it, but it was just something which, since we had someone from the Opportunity Center, I thought it'd be good for us just to address it. Okay, let's see. I'm looking at my fellow committee members, seeing if you guys have additional questions, comments for either some of the speakers or for staff.
I have well, it's kind of one topic probably for staff and for the committee. So, Mayview is talking about money for COVID testing. And I'm just curious, how would this testing work along with the other testing efforts that are going along? Like, why do we feel like this is a good use of funds right now?
So I'll ask Aaron Makbul to chime in if I don't get this dialed in correctly. But of course, the Mayview Center serves low-income members of our population that may not have medical insurance, and so they have a sort of a opportunity to provide to go from to serve those individuals and then provide testing where that testing may be needed at that moment in time, as opposed to sending individuals then to another testing center. That's my, thumbnail sketch of it. Happy to hear from Aram if there's more to articulate on that, or if I got it wrong.
Hi, this is Aram. So I think, John, you covered almost everything. So we reached out to all the agencies that we are working with, and maybe you actually have a need for funding at this point because they are kind of serving around 1,800 clients at the moment. And they think that, in the coming months, they would be needing some funding for the testing part. So we are kind of entertaining their request.
Yeah, I thought under the federal law, the tests are available free. And the reason I'm asking is I'm also wondering about our RV population. And again, we've seen the number of vehicles parked in the main areas go down by about 50%. And so it seems like a really good opportunity to go talk to the people that are still here seems like those are the vehicle dwellers that didn't have another place to go. And I was just wondering if there are some of these CDBG funds that we could use for figuring out kind of this vehicle dwelling issue and kind of understanding that population better. You know, you guys have assigned all the money, which we want to do. And so I just wonder what staff thinks about trying to use some of that money to understand the RV dwellers, the ones that are truly, you know, on the edge of homelessness. Maybe there's another way we could do that, but.
I think the current focus is to implement the safe parking site that we've been focusing primarily on the, I'm forgetting the name of it. I think it's called the, on Gang Road. But in any case, out near the athletic center as a site for providing services and hygiene in particular that during the current health emergency is supportive for vehicle dwelling, such as it is, whether it's RV or personal vehicle.
I think I'm really suggesting something different, that COVID-19 has given us an opportunity to kind of potentially segregate that population. If there were people that were living here while they were working and had another place to go, again, half of the vehicles have disappeared. So my hypothesis is that we had a pretty mixed population, and now we have an opportunity as almost a side effect of COVID to maybe get a better understanding.
Well, I think that, you know, quite frankly, focused perhaps beyond the diagnosis to then providing the services. That's where the safe parking site comes into play, and it is in combination with the other distributed safe parking sites that planning has taken the lead to try to provide, you know, and elsewhere at houses of worship, religious institutions throughout the community.
So are we going to see any of those open up soon?
Well, I think that the COVID issues have made it difficult for everyone to make some progress on the variety of fronts. Either John or perhaps Rachel might want to comment on it, but I think that it has kind of set everyone back in terms of the ability to really get organized on the other sites, but certainly on our safe parking. The city with the county establishment of a safe parking location, that work is proceeding. And I think it's a matter of actually getting it done at this point.
Are these funds eligible to support that kind of program?
So thank you for that, Vice Mayor. We did look into that issue, and we did hear back from HUD that it would not be used to support the areas where we would need, you know, funding or be interested in funding in cases such as providing showers or restroom facilities, or, you know, getting the facilities up and running. We arguably could use the funding to support case management, but that's not, I think the area that we need to spend the money or focus in on is how do we get the facilities up and running.
Okay. Okay. So again, I'm not going to belabor the point for these dollars, but I am talking about essentially that the case management or the registration piece. I do think we have an opportunity where kind of in normal times, it was really hard to tell like who needed help and who was kind of doing it to avoid very long commutes.
So one thing we can do on following the finance committee is we can build this out a little bit more in the staff report to council and sort of give you a status update as to where we are in the safe parking program and how this at all, you know, may be influenced by that.
Yeah, and so again, I just want to make sure you guys are hearing me. I'm not just talking about the safe parking program. I'm talking about really like making contact with the people that are currently here and trying to understand their situation, right? Even if we don't have a place for them to park. Does that make sense? Do you guys understand at least what I'm trying to say?
I think we do, and you know, again, just to not to again belabor the point, but I think once you find out what their situation is, having the safe parking site provides a next step for that.
Absolutely. Right.
So,
but again, as we see people here in town for quite a long period of time, I think it would be good to almost have a registry or kind of know who they are. But
Tom, are you thinking of providing services for people who are living in their vehicles on El Camino?
El Camino and really throughout the city. Again, the police chief has said we've seen quite a decrease. And again, so I think there were different kinds of vehicle dwellers. And I think the ones that are here are the ones that don't have any other place to go. And those are the ones that could use caseworkers and more help, right? So I'm saying they've kind of sorted themselves through the virus, and it's an opportunity for us to understand the population better.
So I wonder, were you done, Tom?
Yes.
Okay, so I want to come back to the Mayfield issue. Jonathan, do you know whether this is Mayview here or Mayview in East Palo Alto? Do you know which one it is?
Yes, and my understanding is it's here in Palo Alto.
Okay, so they're still located here even though they've merged, right?
Yeah, I think there's some remodeling work that's going on, but yeah, they still have some presence here.
Okay, so the
yeah,
issue,
no, I'm sorry, I'm getting a note. The testing actually would be in East Palo Alto.
I thought so. I think they've now started. Yes, because I've talked with their mayor. So I want to go back to the that was how much was going to that 75?
Yes, let me double check.
75,000 or 60. I don't have it right in front of me.
75, yeah, 67,000.
Yeah, something right in that range. So, and that's being done for testing. So, and Tom, I heard you say you thought testing was free.
I thought it was free to a person who needs to be tested right now under the federal law.
Under the federal law, what?
I don't think you're allowed to charge people for COVID testing.
I think they charge them all the time for COVID testing. I was on the phone for 2 hours with the county today. Definitely they charge.
Well, the provider pays, but the consumer doesn't pay.
In many cases, the consumer is paying. Many cases.
We should check on that. I don't think that's legal, but
I don't know. It's I don't know why it wouldn't be legal. It's a test. It's administered by somebody in a doctor's office, and you pay for it.
There was a federal law passed recently.
Right. So I guess our understanding is that it's free to the clients, but maybe it has an expense.
Yes, it is. Yeah. I think if they're following the pattern that most counties are doing now, it's free to the client, but someone has paid for the test. There's no.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. Yeah.
Okay, it's free to the client if they cannot pay. So, or in some cases, as you heard me talk about before, Hayward and San Mateo, you don't have to pay regardless. It's a free clinic. But I'm just a little puzzled that the 75 is going to East Palo Alto, but I think now that they put those two groups together, this probably makes sense. But if someone knows anything that's different, that would be helpful to know. The testing issue is a big issue. It was 2 hours on the phone today with the county, so there's a great deal of background in the testing and lots more testing that's going to be done. So Tom, I'd like to know, and I'll find out tomorrow from somebody, probably later tonight, whether or not there are free tests that are coming from the government. And I think that's not what you're saying. You're saying they're free to the person who can't afford it, but no one has purchased them.
It's free to all consumers, whether you can afford it or not. There's no copays, no deductibles, no insurance charges, but there are some loopholes. If you go out of network, some insurers have been billing people. They're not supposed to, though.
Okay. I'm actually talking to Nancy Olson tonight from Stanford, so I'll ask her that, because that's not my understanding. So you think there's a new federal law that says that—
I'll send you the info. Yeah, it's been out for a while. But again, somebody has to pay. The provider, the hospital pays.
Somebody has to pay, right? So I'd be interested in knowing more about who is behind the funding of those particular tests.
Councilmember Rennes, I can't answer the question about the funding of the test and kind of the free testing
Hi,
for
Rachel.
consumers. Hi, how are you?
Good.
But as far as the Mayview Clinic, they do have a facility here in Palo Alto that actually is going to be renovated with CDBG funds, actually from the prior year's allocation. So that will be renovated, but partly because of the COVID-19, that facility is not being staffed, and they've consolidated their staff, I believe, at their Sunnyvale and their East Palo Alto location. So EPA would be the closest location for someone who lived in Palo Alto to go and receive testing. The other great thing about Mayview is if
that is free, I know. There's no charge for that.
yeah, and if someone does go there and they test positive, and let's say they don't have a place to live, they can't self-quarantine, they are also connected with the rest of the county's network that's helping provide some of the hotel and motel rooms for people who don't have a place to stay. So it is both the testing, but also access to some resources that are being run out of the county level and not so much at the local level.
Okay, great, thank you.
So I'll go ahead and move the staff motion. Again, part of that, I'm moving the staff recommendation, I guess, for the allocations.
Okay, second. Are you altering anything, Tom, or is that the recommendation from staff straightforward?
I think it's straightforward. I think they did a good job of balancing all these requests.
And it's the first year, Jonathan, that you have had the CARE money, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Not likely to get it again, perhaps.
Hope not.
So was the staff motion, did you mean to recommend the staff allocations, or was that, it wasn't really clear in the motion?
Yeah, the staff recommended allocations.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, does the maker wish to say anything about the motion?
Nope.
Okay, seconder?
Fine.
Okay. Yeah, we heard from the people at the Opportunity Center, and I've heard from a bunch of people kind of around the Encina area. And the city manager mentioned that he wants to bring it back to council. I don't know whether we need to make this part of the amendment, or whether the city manager, you're gonna do this anyways.
Well, no, to be clear, I was suggesting that the issue is the larger issue of permanent supportive housing for our homeless. I don't know that we have a scheduled council discussion on that topic.
Okay, so then maybe to the maker of the motion, we heard from the Opportunity Center, and we heard about the kind of disruption that some of the people have at the, on Encina, that prevents them from being able to rehabilitate some of the people, provide the services and housing that people need. So I'd like to also make that as a amendment then to the motion.
And what is it again?
Oh, so Philip, I don't know if Philip's still on or not, but he talked about how they're trying to provide services for needy people, and the problem is that there are some people who aren't participating or aren't kind of following the rules, so to speak, and so they're basically, I don't know if Philip's still on or not. If he is, maybe you could enable him. But
what does he want? Greg? What do you want?
I think, so I think I think these organizations are providing a lot of good for the city, and it sounds like the Opportunity Center in general could use some help. And
I'm not going to support it. I don't see how it's even agendized. It's nothing to do with the CDBG funding allocation.
I'd wait to deal with that, Greg. Maybe with I think I deal with Ed, and Ed can tell you who to deal with, whether it's Bob Johnson or whomever it may be. I understand the issue.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people who are really, it's kind of a lot of angst for them, right?
I understand the issue, and it just seems totally unrelated to what we're talking about tonight.
I don't think there's support for it, Greg.
Okay. Well, I just want to bring that up because I know that there's a lot of people, including the person that Philip spoke about this issue. So I'm just trying to figure out how do we get resolution to it. I mean, there's a big global thing of how do we solve housing for the world, but then there's this issue on Encina in front of the Opportunity Center.
So your amendment was to support which group?
No, it's okay. I'm not going to get support for it. I'm just bringing this up as an issue that we have to figure out how to deal with it. And I know the same guy just talked about like big global issue, but I think there's this.
It doesn't
local
need to
issue.
be in this one, Kim. Thanks.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think maybe a colleague's memo or some other way if you have an idea.
Okay. Any other discussion on this topic? Okay, so let's take a vote then. Vice Mayor?
Yes.
Councilmember Nis?
Yes.
Okay, I vote yes as well. So we're going to close this item and move to item 3, the staff and UAC request for adopting the transfers for the electrical finance plan. And I know there's a memo. Does staff have a presentation for this item?
Yes, good evening, Chair Tanaka, council members, Dean Batchelor, Utility Director. Tonight, Utilities has 2 items on the agenda. Back on March the 3rd, we brought to you one report that included the preliminary rate, electric rates, and financial plans, along with the gas rates in the financial plan for fiscal 2020-21. Excuse me, both of these plans were recommended by the Utility Advisors Commission and staff for an increase of a 2% electric increase, a 3% gas increase for rates. These recommendations were prior to the COVID-19 pandemic. And in light of that outbreak, you received last Thursday, April the 29th, an at-place memo outlining an Alto rate plan involving a 0 rate increase for both utilities for the next 2 years, and no more than a 5% rate increase for the following 3 years. Staff's available from engineering, admin, budget, and power resources to answer your questions tonight. I'd like to introduce Eric Keniston, our rate manager, who's going to walk us through the presentations. So with that, Eric, I'm going to turn it over to you. Thanks.
Thank you very much, and good evening, Chairman Tanaka and members of the Finance Committee. Tonight, let me bring up the presentation. So tonight, we're going to be bringing to you two motions. One is the electric rate presentation and one on the gas. So I'll start with electric.
Are you going to do 3 and 4 together then? Are you going to present both 3 and 4 together?
I'll be presenting them separately.
Okay.
So, yes. So, here we go. Let me make sure. My apologies as I switch the. I'd like to switch the control. Sorry, I have a secondary screen and it is bringing it up on the wrong one. So
we still see it actually.
You can still see it. Yeah.
It's not as big, but it's still good.
Yes. Let's see if I can switch it a little bit.
Can I ask a quick question, maybe to save some time?
Yes.
It's really my colleagues. I mean, there's kind of 2 options for both utilities. I don't know where you guys are, if you're thinking about the 0% increase or considering increases.
Yeah, so there's 2 options on the table. One, in light of everything going on in today's world, and we feel it's our responsibility to bring to you the 0% scenario for and show you what it would be for 2 years for electric. With an understanding that may have some need for one-time cost-cutting measures. The other one, which was seen by the Utilities Advisory Commission back on April 15th, and what they approved back then was a 2% rate increase proposal for FY21. So that sums up the 2 options that we're bringing to you tonight to choose from.
Right. Yeah, I didn't mean to cut you off, and we can still go through the deck. I just wondered. I will say personally that I actually think we should look at the increases, and so I would want to go through the decks, but if you two are set on the 0% increases, I mean, I read all the reports, and I don't know if we do have these two options to choose from. So just trying to suggest maybe if we had, maybe we could state our preferences up front. We might give some direction for which presentation we want to see between the options.
Yeah, I guess, so I think I'm all for expedient meetings, right? So I think you and I might disagree on this though, because I feel that a lot of people are hurting, businesses, residents, everyone. And there are times to do rate increases, and there's times when I think it's better for us not to. So I actually think the staff memo is actually on target in terms of delaying it for this year. You know, 2% doesn't sound like a lot, but when you're a small business and you're already losing a ton of money, I mean, it's just adding fuel to the fire. It's really, really hard. Or if you're a renter here and you can't pay your rent, or you're, you know, a homeowner here and you can't pay your mortgage, or you lost your job, this 2%, you know, these kind of what seems like trivially small increases really hurt a lot. It's the difference sometimes between, you know, can they get lunch or not, right? So I realize that, you know, from a perspective of, well, everyone in Palo Alto is really rich, you know, what's 2%? Maybe most years that's okay, but I think this year, especially with the outbreak and the seriousness of the situation, especially the economic depression that we're going through right now, I would find it hard to do a rate increase at this point.
Well, I think, did I hear you ask Tom whether or not, if we already had made a decision, are you suggesting we don't go through the entire report?
Or maybe we get an early read on our position and yeah, how locked in we are, and then we could go through the reports.
So my early read is to not raise the rents. I think this is, it just sends a bad message, aside from, this is really a tough time, as Greg just described. This is very difficult.
Yeah.
So I don't mind watching the presentation, but yes, I've made up my mind.
Okay, well, so I'm pretty set the other way. I think.
You want
yes,
the increase?
Well, yes, it's a tough time. It's a tough time for our city. Our utilities are supposed to be cost recovery utilities, and you know, for the electric, it looks like the cost of the power and the distribution is going to be even more than the 2%. And I'm also very concerned about having several years of 5% increases in a row. And I think smoothing those out is actually easier on people. And then the kinds of things that we're doing to cut costs really go against a lot of our environmental programs, a lot of the SCAP stuff that we've started. And so I just think it's the wrong thing to do. So we are cutting a lot of things, but these very small increases, I think we also need to look at the city's budgets and kinds of policies we want to have in place.
So I think we should deliberate this, right? And that's the purpose of this committee, is for us to have this tough discussion and see if we could sway each other, right? I know staff has a presentation here. I know that there's some members of the public on the call right now, especially one of them, I think, wrote us a letter, which I don't know if he wishes to speak about it or not, but I'd like to give him a chance, or others who may be interested in speaking on this topic. So the presentation might help enlighten us a bit. Maybe some of the public comments might as well. But I would say that before we take a vote, we should definitely hear the public. Whether we go through the presentation or not, we can, I'm open either way. And so I guess I'm looking to my fellow committee members. Would you guys like to see the presentation, or maybe would staff like to give a short summary of the presentation?
Yeah, I guess maybe I would ask Eric, maybe you could hit like the reasons for the original rent increases, and then the cost saving measures that would be in place to go to zero.
So the original rate increase was, and let me see if I quickly have the slide. The original proposal that we brought forth was really, it was about just a 2% rate increase, so enough to keep revenues about stable. It kept up with load losses, truly. In the electric utility, up to the point that we first did the forecast, we have revenues are right about the level of expenses. Plus, we have, due to good hydroelectric conditions that we've had from last year and coming into the beginning of this year, our reserve position is fairly healthy. So one of the things that we were planning on doing this year was paying back a $10 million loan that we took a few years ago from the Electric Special Projects Reserve. We were also planning on taking some money and putting it towards the, putting more money towards the Hydro Stabilization Reserve. And additionally, we were setting aside some money that we'd already had planned for the LCFS program. We were setting that aside because it's earmarked for specific purposes and we wanted to get it out of the regular reserves. We were also planning on setting aside some money for capital improvement reserves. So we were in a pretty good reserve position. Sitting today, we're seeing that hydro conditions might not be as rosy going forward. And so we're anticipating that that money that we would have otherwise put towards the hydroelectric is probably going to get used for purchase costs. We still, even in both of these scenarios, the 0 and the 2% rate increase, I still have factored in that we are paying back the loan to the Special Project Reserve. But in the 0 rate proposal, probably will not be putting money away towards the Capital Improvement Reserve for long term. So that's the highlight differences between the two. I would also say that the 0 rate increase option, when we looked at it, we assumed that we would have about a 10% load drop from what we'd originally projected going into FY21. Whether that will materialize, we're not quite sure. We also assumed about 50% lost revenue from hotels, restaurants, and that amounted to about $2.4 million just revenue we would not recover on that side. So those really are your two main options between the two flavors. But I would say the electric fund going to 0, if we have a 0 rate increase, we still have the look to be relatively healthy. We will probably might need about $1.5 million of one-time cuts within the next 5 years. And we anticipate that reserves would drop below minimum in like FY 2023. But on the whole, we think that we'll come back out of it with the rate profile that we've shown you tonight, or that we have in the presentation. I'll just skip ahead quickly to the, here's the 0 rate increase. And you see for 2 years where our revenues drop below expenses. And then we come back up to where we're matching revenues. The line up at the top is our revenues and the bars represent costs. So for a few years we're below, but to do that, we're using up some of that gap that we have, that extra reserves that we were able to put away from prior times. And would you like me to switch to the 2% scenario and have a look at that? Or?
Yeah, please.
Okay. And so here's a portrait of where the reserves end up under a 0 rate increase scenario. You see that supply operating reserve does drop below minimum for a short period of time. The distribution operating reserve also drops below minimum for a short period of time. But in the proposal that we brought forth to the OAC, which is more of a steady state 2 and 3% rating, 2 to 3 to 4% rate increase going forward, revenues roughly match expenses in most years. And as to be predicted, the operating reserves are projected to be stable or within a meeting target range within the 5-year time frame. So those are your two proposals that we have for you tonight. And I can talk more about each one and nuances with each.
So, and just to clarify, the UAC met 2 weeks ago, so they looked under COVID at both options and they suggested the 2%.
Yes, we had for them a 0%, a 1 year 0% view. So, but yes, we opted for 2% at that point, or they opted for 2% at that point in time.
What was their discussion about the 0% option?
Mainly feel that it was prudent to have at least an inflationary rate of increase going forward. Was where the discussion mainly went towards.
I think also too, Tom, is that they also looked at the healthiness of the reserves. Mm-hmm. That was one of the biggest things that they looked at, is that, as you saw in the slides from Eric prior, where those reserve lines fall, they didn't want to take those risks. And now with the 2% increase, reserves stay pretty stable through that period of time. So that was the biggest thing, I think, that swayed them away from a 0% increase.
Okay, maybe before we get into too much deliberation, I just want to open up the public comment. Does clerk want to see if anyone online want to say a few words?
Hi, thank you, Chair Tanaka. This is Kim in the clerk's office. We do have one speaker, but if anyone else wishes to speak, please raise your hand in the Zoom app or press *9 if you are participating by phone. So the first speaker we have is Don Jackson. So we'll give him 3 minutes to speak.
Hello. I serve as a commissioner to the Utilities Advisory Commission, together with fellow Commissioner Lauren Smith, who is also on the call tonight. We'd like to comment on one aspect of tonight's agenda item 3, the 2021 Electrical Financial Plan. We'd like to emphasize for the record that our comments tonight are personal and not the official position of the UAC. On page 3 of Director Batchelor's memo, there's a list of potential cost reduction actions. Drawing your attention to the 5th bullet point, which states, reduce the amount of renewable energy purchased by the utility below the 100% carbon neutral. This is a significant, urgent, and time-sensitive opportunity to raise millions of dollars per year. The proceeds could be used to offset the impact of deferring electric rate increases and to fund important electrification efforts in support of our strategic climate action plan goals. Since we joined the UAC last July, these options have been discussed several times at UAC meetings and with staff. At the March meeting, pre-COVID, staff proposed, shall we say, a lighter version of one of these options, specifically to utilize unbundled RECs to neutralize any residual emissions caused by the change to hourly accounting, generating approximately $2 million annually with negligible impact to our power content label. UAC voted to approve this proposal and sent it to council. In our view, the financial challenges to the city, utilities, and ratepayers resulting from the COVID pandemic warrant immediate consideration of additional revenue generating opportunities via the sale of RECs. These alternatives are very complex. To simplify and summarize, options exist that could raise an additional $3 to $4 million annually for multiple years at the cost of lowering the renewable energy percentage of our power content label. These options provide the opportunity to significantly offset the effects of any near-term revenue shortfall while providing a 0% rate increase this year and potentially increasing our allocations to a reserve fund designated for local carbon reduction initiatives. We have 2 requests to you tonight. Number 1, we urge the Finance Committee and Council to consider these options during the current budget and planning process. And number 2, we request that Council direct the UAC to review and consider these additional REC-based revenue opportunities at the UAC May 20th meeting and report its findings back to Council. I've got to skip the details of the actual proposals. They're in the memo that I emailed to you earlier today. In conclusion, we fully appreciate there will be valid reasons to not pursue either of these options at this time. But in any case, the decision to pursue them or not should be an explicit choice that we make and not due to the lack of awareness, inattention, or inaction. That's it.
Thank you. Clerk, are there any other speakers?
No, there are no other speakers at this time.
Okay. Okay, let's bring it back to council and we'll close the public hearing for item 3. What do you guys thought?
It sounds like we're, if you want us to jump in, it sounds like we are, it doesn't sound as though your 2 committee members are in agreement. So I'm going to let Tom go ahead because he feels strongly about raising this and I feel strongly about not. So
I'm with you actually on this one as well. So we could take a vote on it now. One thing I think that we should think about is what our commissioner just said. I don't know if you guys have read his letter.
I have not. I didn't see his letter, but thank you.
Yeah, so it was if you go to the agenda, it's a link on there, but it's an intriguing idea, and it looks like it's maybe a way to not get a rate increase during this economic depression, at the same time also keep the utility fairly well funded. And it seems like, you know, given there's a lot less activity in the city, right, because of the shelter in place, and maybe, you know, for a while until things ramp back up, that these RECs can be sold without having much economic or environmental impact as well. So it's an intriguing idea. So I guess I don't know if Vice Mayor, you had a chance to read his letter either.
I attended several UAC meetings where the topic was discussed.
Okay.
Again, I'm having a little difficulty, and that was a personal statement when the UAC looked at the 2 options, recommended the 2% as kind of an inflationary rate. Again, it's just covering our transmission losses. It's bringing our utility to break even. And to go to 0, you know, I'm looking at the list of things that we cut or delay, and they're the kinds of things I don't think we necessarily want to delay. So
well, I guess what I was asking is more, I mean, we could take a vote on the 0% right now if you want, but I guess what I'm asking is, you know, Commissioner Jackson brought up the topic of selling some of the RECs, right, that we have. And it seems intriguing, right, because it looks like it's a way to generate revenue, especially for maybe ones that we don't actually need right now, given 80% of our carbon footprint is transportation, right? And given that, you know, not a lot of people commuting into Palo Alto right now, do we need those kind of offsets at this very moment? So I thought it was actually kind of interesting to see that.
Did the commissioner just say they intended to bring it up again at their next meeting? Did I hear that?
I don't know about that, but I guess actually maybe I could just ask the commissioner to come back online if available. Clerk, can you enable him, please?
Yes, I've just enabled him to talk. He just needs to.
Hello, yep, this is Don. Yes. So well, the question, so when I was asking the Finance Committee and Council to ask the UAC to take this up at their May 20th meeting and look at these additional REC selling revenue opportunities beyond the earlier one that was already recommended, which was, I would call it REC selling light, which is a good thing to do, but we could do REC selling more than light, you know, medium or high, and generate more revenue. And there's also, there are costs to this in terms of power content label and things like that. It's a long, detailed conversation we can have now or in the future. But I think that that council and UAC, given the changing economic environment, have an obligation or really should take a hard look at this and then make a decision again based on new realities.
Well, it's very tempting. Again, I'm sorry that I didn't see your letter, but I I'd be willing to defer this until after your meeting takes place. I'll be interested in knowing what my colleagues say, but we're not making a decision that's going to go into place.
Again, I think there've been I think we should hear from staff. My understanding, there's been a whole series of conversations and changing the way we account for our carbon-free electricity. I believe that's what we're talking about, right here, Dean? And again, the UAC, I'm not sure where the UAC as a group is on it right now.
And I don't know, but again.
Well, I think
they're going to meet in what, 2 weeks?
Well, could we hear from Dean here?
Yeah, let me ask Jonathan. Jonathan, you there?
Yes, Jonathan Aubenschein, Assistant Director of Utility Resource Management. Good evening, council members. The discussions that the commissioner is referring to, or the concept that the commissioner is referring to, was a concept that we explored over the past year in the context of a number of broader discussions about how we account for carbon in our electric portfolio, and how we would like to, what sorts of resources we would like to have in our portfolio long term. And it was a concept we were exploring cautiously. And I guess to summarize it succinctly, we have a number of, so we have achieved carbon neutrality by building a number of renewable resources within California. Currently, those resources, in part because there are a number of other utilities and community choice aggregators who are buying right now, they are fairly valuable compared to out-of-state electricity. And the concept, again, sort of in the early stages of exploring it, was that there would be no impact to the climate from exchanging these in-state renewable energy resources for out-of-state renewable energy resources, and taking the difference between the value of the in-state resources and the lower cost of the out-of-state resources, and applying that towards potentially things like local decarbonization. The trade-off that the commissioner was referring to is that, so we have a power content label that we publish every year that shows the sources of our renewable power, and that is something that's subject to state regulations. And because the state is trying to encourage the development of more renewables in state, which is something we've already done, they require that any out-of-state renewable electricity is shown as essentially fossil power, brown power, for a variety of reasons. And so there is this trade-off in the public perception of what our power looks like. We've had some very early discussions with environmental advocacy groups, and there is a lot of tentativeness about the use of out-of-state renewables and what message that sends. So it's a discussion we were planning to pursue a little bit in the spring, but of course with the coronavirus, we've been focusing our efforts elsewhere for the last couple of months. So that's a summary of where that discussion was when we last left it off.
Wasn't part of that discussion too switching to the unit of time that we do the accounting?
There was, and that discussion I think resolved, and we're going to come back to the Finance Committee with a recommendation from the Utilities Advisory Commission on that. But the costs and trade-offs associated with that proposal that the Utility Advisory Commission adopted were relatively small and possibly less controversial.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Greg.
Okay. So it sounds like there's been the staff default right now, unless we do something otherwise, would be to do the 0% raise, or basically no raise. And staff was already planning to bring this back to the UAC in terms of the recs by default. That was the default plan already.
Excuse me, Councilmember Tanaka, you do have one more speaker.
Oh, okay. So let's reopen the public hearing, allow this one of the speakers to speak. So Clerk, why don't you go ahead?
Okay, it's Lauren Smith.
Good evening, Chair Tanaka and council members. I just want to add comment to what my colleague Don was stating. I think when it comes down to it, there are a couple of things that when we looked at this, we recognize that as much as individually we may not be comfortable with a 0%, or we may be comfortable with a 0% rate hike, there are still opportunities for us to take advantage of bucket one recs or in-state recs, given the massive surplus. In the last UAC meeting, we actually the UAC voted to sell down our surplus of bucket one recs. And I think what our proposal is, and if you'll afford us the opportunity to discuss this further with our colleagues, I think our proposal is to sell down further, or if you will, turn up the volume of sale, thereby generating a greater amount of revenue than is already in plan. That's my only comment.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Okay, I think I'll make a motion then that we forward the staff recommendation of 0%. It sounds like, from what John's saying, this is we're going to go to the UAC for them to deliberate further, or do we need to make that part of the motion?
I think it needs to go to council, the rate increases. It seems like it's almost an orthogonal issue in a way.
Well, I guess I don't know if John or whoever it was close to this on the UAC, so can someone speak to it?
So we do intend to take the discussion of the topic Commissioners Jackson and Smith were referring to back to the Utilities Advisory Commission.
Okay, so then there's nothing that we need to do. Then we just make the staff recommendation and that's it. Do I have a second?
Yes, I second it. I am interested in knowing though what could come from the discussion they're having in 2 weeks. And again, not having seen the letter, I don't know if that will change anything, but for now I am at the 0%. But it is indicating that some discussion by the Utilities Commission could alter that. But again, I think I need to know more about it. But at this point, I'm still at 0.
I think what this might do, given what the commissioner said, is it might make the 0% even better, and perhaps even provide funds for other things. So, but let's let them deliberate it. Okay, I think we've all spoken on this topic. We could deliberate more, but I think we've kind of exhausted it, if I'm not mistaken. So
I'd just like to summarize my reasons for no. And again, I wanted you guys to hear, again, our reserves go below our minimum, and I do think that's risky. We're switching from a 5-year to a 10-year forecast. It's really hard to see out 10 years. We're going to go 0, and then we're going to have several years of pretty high rate increases in a row. And I would much rather smooth those out and have a 2% this year and a 3 or 4% in future years. And that even at the 2%, we're kind of breaking even. We're covering transmission losses, but we still have potentially higher hydro costs. Construction costs have been going up. I just think the smart thing to do for the utility is the 2% increase. So I'll be voting no.
okay. So Vice Mayor votes no. Councilmember Nuss, how do you vote?
Yes.
And I vote yes. Okay, so that's item 3. Let's go to item 4, which is very similar. So I don't know how much time we need to spend on this one, but does staff have a presentation on this?
Yes, council members, I do have a presentation on this one. I can also I can try to stream through it fairly quickly if you'd like.
Would you? Yeah, yes.
Yeah, I think that might be good. I mean, maybe you could just summarize the pros and cons, and and then we could open it back up to the public for folks to talk about it, and then we could deliberate as a committee here.
So with the gas side, we have, it's a, same problem again. There we go. We have again, we have a 0% distribution rate increase, and the one that the UAC saw a few weeks ago is a 5% distribution rate increase, resulting in a 3% overall bill change. The difference between the two here is is more stark. With the 0% proposal, the reserves will fall below, are projected, if we maintain costs where they're at, the reserves will fall below minimum in FY 2022. And if we did 2 years of rate increases followed by only 5s, we would need to find one-time deferrals of costs of upward of 13.8 million based upon the current projections that we have. So this chart, slide number 8, shows you where we're at. Again, the line at the top are revenues, the bars are expenses, and we are consistently running in the red from FY 21 through 23, and we don't start recovering again until 24, 25. And this assumes again, and so the proposal is fairly dire. The reserve projections that we're showing here, we skirt right along the minimum, but again, this is with an influx of $13.8 million somewhere. If we do not have or cannot find it to cut costs from this graph, we fall well below minimum and go to zero territory. Let's contrast that with what the UAC saw, which was a 3% rate increase in FY21, followed by 6% rate increases moving forward. The revenue projections, we are able to maintain above costs. The increase will be split roughly 50-50 between operations and capital improvement, but we're able to keep the operating reserves right about on target through most of the reserve range. So that's the very quick presentation on both, but I think the takeaway on this is that 2 years of zero rate increases in the gas side will require much more in the way of either windfall reserves or finding places to cut existing expense projections.
Do you have a slide that shows the list of things that are proposed to be cut that's in the memo?
I do not believe that I have a slide in this deck that shows the proposed cuts. Those came in late.
Maybe as you look for it, I'll just call for public comment, and that way it gives you time to look for stuff. So, clerk, is there any members of the public that wish to speak on item 4?
Thank you, Chair. This is Kim in the clerk's office. No, there are no speakers as of this time.
Okay, so we'll close the public hearing. Erica, do you have the slide?
Maybe you could just show the memo. I mean, it's things like ending carbon neutral gas. It's
correct.
Ending cross-bore inspections, cutting back on gas pipe replacement. It's pretty big stuff.
So
I think also to Chair or Council Du Bois, also involved in that is also within the electric one that we didn't really talk about too much was that we would have to scale back the AMI projects, which was the advantage for customers to have the ability for hourly usage for data for, and we'll probably have to cut that back for several years. That was one of the cuts that we looked at. And then, like I said, we need to, look at some other cuts that we would make from just a safety precaution portion of it. Like I said, as you mentioned, eliminating the cross bores. It's worth about $2 million that we put in the memo portion of it over the 2 years. And then also some of the energy efficiency pieces that are going to look for the longer paybacks that we'll have to make these cuts. The gas side of the house is a little bit more dire straits than the electric side.
So I think given that, where I might have been someplace else without our second discussion, I think actually in this case, the 3% overall does make sense. So I don't know where the other two of you are. Tom, I think you're probably in favor of that. Am I right?
Yeah, I'm really concerned about the cuts to both. Yes, I'm there.
So why don't I make a motion on that one that we go with the, in this case, it's called the alternate proposal, but it is a 3% overall rate increase with 5% distribution rate increase. Do you need more than that, Kim?
So I would second that.
Does the maker want to speak on
One
this?
second, I'm getting the motion up. Hang on 1 second.
Okay.
Thank you. You're doing a good job, Kim.
Thank you. And the last part was a 5% increase on what was that?
So it's a 3% overall rate increase, but it in parentheses 5% distribution rate increase. It's the alternate proposal, which was listed. I don't know what page it was on. And this is the, just so you know, Kim, this is the gas utility financial plan. Just so you know that this is the gas, not the electric.
Okay, thanks. 3%.
It was the proposal made on slide 17.
Thank you. I didn't, maybe there were numbers on some of them, but there was, regardless of who's doing a proposal, I would remind everyone that numbers really help, especially when we're doing this, you know, from our far off locations.
Okay, does a seconder have anything you want to say on this?
Just again, you know, when you look at the list of things that we're cutting in both utilities, we're cutting sustainability efforts, we're cutting safety measures. And again, I think also when it comes to gas, moving away from our carbon neutral offsets, and also just, you know, as we desire electrification, I think having our gas utility be a full cost recovery makes a lot of sense as a policy.
Okay. So let me speak on this. So
hang on 1 second, just while. So that that 5% rate increase, I mean 5% distribution rate increase is in parentheses, just so that you're listing it as it did in the proposal. So right after overall rate increase, then you'll have a parenthesis 5% distribution rate increase. Good, thank you.
Councilmember Niss, I think when we look at the staff report, actually it has just a 3%. There's no.
Well, maybe they meant it simply for.
They said 5% originally, but then they said 3%. So I think the 5% is the old one.
I'm just reading it from here, so I don't know which way staff wanted it. For some reason, it's included in our material for tonight.
Does staff want to say anything on this?
I would say that it is a it is a 5% distribution rate increase. It ends up, because of the split, that distribution costs are about 2/3 of the overall pie, that the end effect is a 3% rate increase, at the 3% overall rate increase at the end of the day. So,
okay.
And 5%, and the distribution rates are actually what can be changed. The commodity portions, everything else floats with the market monthly. So
we'll leave it in.
Okay. So let me speak on this item. I hear the kind of pros and cons of both sides. Right now, as I mentioned earlier, we are going through extraordinary economic times, and while on the surface it may seem like, well, gee, we're going to be cutting back on some of our environmental concerns, I think one thing that all we have to do in the morning is look up in the sky and notice how clear the air is, how we're an unprecedented low level of pollution right now because the economy is largely shut down. People aren't driving in as much. A lot of our restaurants aren't even on anymore, so they're not burning as much gas. And so while the COVID-19 has a lot of unfortunate things, the one thing it has had, the one positive effect is that it has really lowered the carbon footprint on this planet, mainly because of the shelter in place. So on the other hand, if you look at the businesses here, right, and I think especially a lot of the restaurants use gas. They are taking it on the chin. I mean, so many of them have been going under, and it's a really big hardship for so many of these companies. And I think probably the biggest use, I would guess, and staff could probably correct, are probably the restaurants. I think the tech companies aren't using a lot of gas probably, but the restaurants certainly do. And so I think this kind of hurts the wrong segment of people that we want to help. I think it's probably better for us to have higher rates later when people can support it. Because right now, I think we're basically, somebody's already having trouble climbing up a hill, we're throwing more weight on their back. And albeit maybe it seems small, it is extra load for someone that is already having a lot of trouble. So I can't support this motion. I think that it's during good times, I definitely want to make sure that we're fully funded and all that stuff, and I totally agree with you on that. But we have reserves for a reason, and the reasons are for extraordinary times like this. And so I think it's probably more appropriate for us to give some relief to our constituents and keep the rates the same versus trying to increase the economic burden on our ratepayers. So that's my thoughts. I don't know if the maker or seconder has any other comments on this item. Otherwise, we could take a vote.
I would just say, yeah, the reason we have reserves is for emergencies, and driving these reserves to zero is reckless, especially with gas.
It's not driving to zero though. It's going to below the minimum, but not driving to zero. So I don't think that's quite right.
Well, it can potentially go to zero, which is what the slide showed. And again, if there's an earthquake, these reserves are not going to be sufficient.
Can staff bring that slide up? Actually, this is probably a good topic for us to look at. Okay. So when I look at the slide, albeit it's not at 9 million, but it balances around between 6 to 7 million. sure, a massive earthquake could take it down to zero. We could take it down to zero even if we did the rate increase. So for me, when I look at this, there's still a fairly healthy margin there. But of course, if we have the tremendous global tidal wave that wipes out everything, okay, yeah, it would take it down. But it would take down any reserve, even if it was a 2% increase to zero. So I get what you're saying, but this is an extraordinary time. I don't think there's been too many pandemics in our lifetime. I mean, the last real big pandemic was 100 years ago. So yeah, I do think reserves are for emergencies, and this is like one of the biggest emergencies that we'll probably know in our lifetime. Would be in the history books of emergencies, of economic impacts. I think we're approaching economic impacts of the Great Depression. 30 million people unemployed. We hear business every day going out of business. So many restaurants are being shut down. I can't think of a better time to actually look at reserves, but we still keep it above the minimum. So, and now also we're environmentally, we've cut back a lot just because the business activity is a lot less. And so that's why we have blue skies right now, bluer than it's ever been. So anyways, I think we probably have to disagree on this, but that's why I can't support this. Anyways, Vice Mayor or Councilmember Nis, do you guys have further comments on this?
Fine.
Okay, so let's take a vote. Okay, Vice Mayor?
Yes.
Okay, Councilmember Nis?
Aye.
Okay, and I vote no. Okay, so I think we're done with item 4. So now we're on to future meetings and agendas. So let's see. I don't know if there's anything we have to discuss as a committee, but if there's something that you guys want to bring up, we could talk about it. Otherwise, I'll probably just jump on the call with our CFO and city manager for the next to plan for the next finance meeting.
I think last year we started these meetings at 5 o'clock, and I would be interested in starting earlier again if everybody else is, rather than starting at 7 p.m.
Certainly by 6.
I prefer actually to keep it the normal time, unless there's something extraordinary where we have like a lot of things to hear. So
can we compromise at 6?
Come on, Greg, let's do 6.
On behalf of staff, I would also certainly endorse 6 o'clock or earlier if you could agree on it, because staff is working a full day before starting these meetings.
Look at Kylie, she's so happy.
Yeah. Okay, let's try 6 o'clock then. But in general, it does put a crunch on my time. Okay, is there anything else that you guys want to bring up?
I think that's it, but thank you.
Okay, I think we'll call this meeting adjourned, and then there's no breakout rooms on this call, so I'll send you guys a Zoom. Okay?
We just hang up.
Yep, we're unzooming.
Good night.